Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues, as always, it's a pleasure to address you. I know that some of you are bored, but I will address you anyway because I have to give, as a gender representative, my report each year, and it really talks about the status of gender in the OSCE region. It talks about the progress, and it talks about the setbacks. So I try to be very blunt when I give my report. But I wanted to reiterate the fact that when we talk about gender equality, we tend to talk a lot about women because we know that women lag behind in terms of equality. But gender equality is about the reality of the lives of men and of women in our regions. And sometimes we need to ask ourselves some really strong questions because we need to ask, what is the status of men's lives in our regions? And we need to answer that because today, as we talk about the topic in which I'm going to focus, I'm going to talk about gender-based violence. And I want us to remember that, in fact, there is a backlash around the world about many men who feel that they have been left behind. There is also a backlash by many men who feel that some of the #MeToo and the revolution, etc., by young people. And we need to remember that it isn't about pitting men against women. It is about all of us having equal access to justice, to the economic life of our countries, to the social life of our countries, to the political life and the cultural life of our countries. It's about that kind of equality that we're talking about. And while we find that women still lag men behind in those opportunities, what I want to focus on is the persistence of one particular problem, and that's gender-based violence. And I want to just reiterate that, again, gender-based violence happens to affect women the most, especially in conflict areas. It tends to affect women the most in societal violence. But we do know that there is an intersectionality, the gender is also men are affected by violence. And we know that the LGBTQ community, there is a lot of violence against young people in that community. So I just want us to put the whole thing into perspective. And I want to talk about violence, therefore, as the abuse of power. People with authority, people who have any kind of authority or power over others, abusing that power in many ways, not simply sexual and physical violence, but we want to understand the issue of psychological violence and of shaming and of ensuring that people feel that they do not have a role or that they are second-class citizens. This happens not only in society, it happens in the workplace, and it happens at home. And I think that we want to focus on the fact that at home it is a silent sort of violence. Nobody knows about it because I will tell you as a physician that very many people who experience gender violence at home are afraid and ashamed to talk to anyone about it. They feel shamed in their community, they feel shamed within their own families. And we know that this is a family values issue. Strong families cannot exist where the woman in the home is shamed, she's disrespected, she's abused physically and in many ways. And evidence tells us that young men who are at a very young age witnessing this violence and this disrespect in the home grow up to perpetuate that when they become leaders in their families. And the girls who watch this at an early age tend to marry men who are perpetrators of violence. So this is a cyclical thing, and it affects the strength of our families. So this is not an ideological issue. It's one that hits at every part of what we try to do. Now, we know that the millennials decided that they were going to speak out against this violence. We saw #MeToo, we saw #TimesUp, we saw #OrangeTheWorld. But even here there was an inequality because in societies where people are poor or they have no access to new technologies or social media, they're unable to speak up. We know that victims of violence who are traumatized do not have the ability to speak up, and minorities don't have the ability to speak up. So here we go, only people who have access to social media have been saying this. And so we need to be, as parliamentarians, the voices for those who do not have the ability to speak for themselves. Now, this is not something new. We have addressed this issue before at every level of the OSCE and the OSCEPA. In 2018, we talked this year as a theme of our meeting about how we implement the things we promise. We come here every year and we talk and we promise and we set about declarations, and then we go home, and quite often we come back the next year and very little has changed. And I think we need to address that. We as parliamentarians are people who have to speak for the disenfranchised in our societies, have to speak out for our citizens who do not have a voice to speak out for themselves. So your duty and your responsibility that we all have is to go back to parliaments and to make sure that we make these things happen, that the things we talk about and we promise and everyone is so passionate about here, that we go back and we implement it. And I think, thank you. I just want to talk a little bit, though. I've talked about violence in the home, and we all know about societal violence and violence in conflict, where we know that rape is now a tactic of war. It is no longer a side effect of war. It is a real tactic. And we know that it is, again, against ethnic minorities and against religious minorities and against women, who are the major victims of this kind of violence. But I think we want to talk about workplace violence just a little bit. And parliamentary violence. We have found in Canada that in our parliaments there are many parliamentarians who feel that they have been either sexual innuendo or various other forms of stereotyping against them. They don't want to speak about it because as parliamentarians, you don't know how to say to your colleague, I don't like it. You don't know how to blow the whistle on your colleague, because as in every form of abuse of power, there is this fear of speaking out and of being shamed and of being intimidated. So we have to address this. We cannot go out and talk to our societies and to everyone else and say, let's do something about violence, when in our own parliamentarians, we have not fixed our own home. We need own homework. Make sure that we can speak with authority, because we have been addressing these problems. I know in some countries within the region and in Canada that this has become a big issue, and that parliaments are now talking about the issue, but then there has to be a redress for the issue. There has to be somebody who is going to be able to look at the issue and discuss it quietly and find a way to deal with the perpetrators of this kind of violence. I think we need to talk about the legal responsibility of employers and the solutions that Parliament can make to bring about some sort of legislation that will deal with workplace violence in the private spaces, and to talk about how we get support for those who have had that kind of violence. I also want to talk to you men in the room. I want you to know that nothing can change unless you join forces, unless you recognize that violence that is perpetrated against men and against women are perpetrated against our sons and our daughters and our wives and our partners. And so we need to become involved. We need to be the solution to this problem. And I know that the United Nations and the OSCE has actually joined groups of men who call Men Engage Alliance at the United Nations level and Men Engage Network at the OSCE. And here the men are talking about how they become strong role models in the home. Fathers and brothers are showing respect for women and for each other. And we talk about how we speak out, sports heroes speaking out in the open on television saying, I'm a football player and I don't stand for anyone to hit my sister or to be violent. So we need to use all of our celebrities to speak out against it. And how we act at home, how we go about showing ourselves as role models in co-parenting, in being strong partners within the home, in respecting each other within the home, will give us a whole new generation of people who will deal with violence, because violence is not normal. And we need to deal with that, and we have a lot of work to do, and I'm challenging all of you men in this room to go back to your parliaments and to try to look at some sort of public awareness campaign, utilizing your celebrities to talk about the issue at home. Now, I want to speak about one other problem that I keep harping on, and that is the issue of women in peace and security and women in all levels of the armed forces. And I want to say I was quite disturbed by a delegate yesterday who spoke out against women in all parts of prevention of conflict, of dealing with conflict, and of resolution of conflict, saying that we know that there are some things that men do better than women. And I felt so devastated at the fact that all the women who serve in all of our country's armed forces and who work very hard as peacekeepers and work within conflict zones, that they have been shamed into believing that they do not do a good job and that they do not belong. And I hope, again, as parliamentarians, you will not carry this message back to your parliaments and to all of the people who fight within your own armed forces, who are women and who are brave. I also just wanted to quickly touch on the idea that as we talk about violence, we tend to talk about women as victims. You know, women aren't victims. Women don't want to be victims. We happen to just be the ones who are treated as victims. But women want to be part of the solution. Women want to be empowered. Women want to say, if we get involved, if we are victims, or so-called victims of war and conflict, we want to make part of the solution. We want to prevent conflict. We're very good at that. And it's been shown, in fact, that when women play a role in conflict resolution, that there are lasting peace. In fact, it's been shown that if women play a role in peaceful resolution to conflict, that treaties last maybe 15 years instead of short-term bursts. Because again, women have as we say, skin in the game. Women know that they are going to be the ones who are going to be suffering most. Men die in conflict, women stay behind, and they are in fact victims of that conflict. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, and I wanted to talk about how we need to deploy women as peacekeepers. It has been found that men and women who are victims of violence during conflict and during war tend to speak more easily to a female peacekeeper or a female police person or a female member of the armed forces. They feel safer, they feel less ashamed, because the concept of the fear of going out to speak about what has happened to you is a big problem, because people not only are afraid of being re-victimized, they're also afraid that their communities and their towns and their villages and the others around them now see them as social pariahs. They are no longer able to work and to focus within their own communities. So these are some of the things that I think we need to talk about. We need to talk about it because women make up 51% of our populations. Because when women are able to be empowered and to work and to take part in the economic and social and political lives of our country, and women are not seen as victims but are partners in creating strong nations, and women become 50% of your productivity, of your productive workforce. It's been shown that when women have been victims of violence, especially in the workplace, they tend to have greater absences from work. They don't go to work often. They get sick a lot. They don't want to be at work. That affects productivity. The bottom line is it's not just about an ideology. It's about how we, men and women, come together within our own nation states to make them strong, to make them able to take a part in the world, in a globalized world where productivity and competitiveness is huge. We are utilizing all of our resources, all of our citizens, and not just some of them. So I know that I tend to repeat this mantra a lot, but I'm hoping that this time we will go back and we will move forward. We have made some gains, I am pleased to say, but I think we have so much more to do. So I'm appealing to you all as my colleagues to go out there and do your thing, men and women. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Hedy, indeed. It's always very interesting to hear your very insightful, very useful for us, and a great guidance in the sphere of gender equality.